what's right.
Fight for what's right.
Blindsided.
I felt blindsided.
My mom is worried for me too.
My mom.
The Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing for Toys R Us runs several hundred pages. Most of it is legal boilerplate, but buried in the financial disclosures is a number that tells you everything you need to know about what happened to this company. $470 million. That's how much 3 Wall Street firms extracted in fees and interest from Toys R Us over 12 years, while the company couldn't afford to fix its own stores. In 2018, every location closed. 33,000 people lost their jobs. None of them received severance. Everyone says Amazon killed Toys R Us. The filing tells a different story. 1 week before the bankruptcy was announced, 5 executives sat down and split $8.2 million in retention bonuses. The CEO took $2.8 million. This was a company that hadn't reported a profit in 5 years. We'll come back to those bonuses and exactly who approved them. But first, the deal that made all of this inevitable. In 2004, Toys R Us had problems. The stores looked like they hadn't been touched since 1990. Walmart was beating them on price. The stock was dropping. But the company also had $2.2 billion in cash. It was generating revenue. It was paying its debts. This was not a company in free fall. It was a company that needed investment. In 2005, 3 firms acquired Toys R Us: KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado Realty Trust. The price tag was $6.6 billion. They put in $1.3 billion of their own capital. The remaining $5.3 billion was borrowed, and that debt was placed directly onto Toys R Us. Not onto KKR, not onto Bain, not onto Vornado, onto the company they had just purchased. Toys R Us was now responsible for repaying the cost of its own acquisition. The debt load was 7.5 times the company's annual earnings. From the moment the deal closed, every dollar Toys R Us generated went to servicing a debt it never asked for. And the man who approved the sale, CEO John Eiler, received $65 million in compensation upon closing. The 33,000 employees who came with the deal received nothing and were never asked. As soon as the acquisition closed, KKR, Bain, and Vornado put a system in place. They signed what they called an advisory agreement. Under this agreement, Toys R Us would pay the 3 firms $15 million per year, increasing by 5% annually, for advisory services. When you go through the bankruptcy filings page by page, one detail stands out above the rest. The 3 firms were not required to provide any actual services GGA for these fees. $15 million a year, automatically deducted, for NUGA contractually guaranteed. On top of that came transaction fees, $81 million at the time of the buyout, $7 million more in 2009, additional fees every time the company refinanced. Over 12 years, the total GGA $470 million. What did that leave for the actual business? Toys R Us was spending $400 million per year on debt interest alone. To put that in proportion, that's more than the company spent on store renovations and e-commerce development combined across the entire 12 years of private equity ownership. Every quarter, $15 million left the building in advisory fees. Every quarter, another round of stores stayed exactly as they were, fluorescent lights buzzing over the same cluttered aisles. The website stayed a generation behind Amazon. The prices couldn't match Walmart. The money that could have saved this company was flowing, quarter after quarter, to 3 firms that had no obligation to do anything in return. Toys R Us was locked in a trap. It couldn't invest because it was repaying debt. It couldn't generate more revenue because it wasn't investing. Between 2010 and 2013, the company attempted an IPO, hoping public markets would provide enough capital to reduce the debt. The IPO failed. No investor wanted a company leveraged that heavily. Then, in 2014, one of the 3 owners told you everything you needed to know without saying a word. Vornado quietly wrote down its entire stake in Toys R Us to 0. In financial language, that means Vornado considered its ownership in the company completely worthless. They knew. And the advisory fees kept coming. $15 million a year, automatically, from a company that one of its own owners had valued at zero. If the company was already dead in Vornado's books, why install new leadership? The following year, KKR and Bain did exactly that. They brought in Dave Brandon as CEO. Brandon wasn't a retail turnaround specialist. He was the former head of Domino's Pizza and the former athletic director at the University of Michigan, a role he left under controversy. His compensation at Toys R Us was $12.5 million a year. 5 years without a profit, $5 billion in debt, and the new CEO makes $12.5 million. He was not hired to save the company. September 2017. Toys R Us files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. $5 billion in debt, $400 million a year in interest, 12 years of extraction. And 1 week before that filing, 5 executives had already collected their reward. $8.2 million in retention bonuses, split among the top leadership. Dave Brandon received $2.8 million. The bonuses were approved by the board of directors, a board that included executives from KKR, Bain, and Vornado, the same firms that had spent 12 years extracting fees from the company while it sank. After the filing, the company returned to court and requested an additional $16 million in executive incentive bonuses. If performance targets were met, the total could reach $32 million. $32 million for 17 executives, $0 for 33,000 workers. Same company, same year. Who signs that check? 6 months later, the restructuring collapsed. Toys R Us announced full liquidation. All 800 US stores would close permanently. Every one of the 33,000 remaining jobs would be eliminated. The people who ran the going out of business sales, who organized the racks and helped the last customers through the door, walked out with nothing. One of those workers was Colleen Clevin. She had spent years at Toys R Us, working the floor, helping families pick out gifts for their kids. When the liquidation was announced, she wrote a petition. Her words were direct. She said the company's executives had given themselves huge payoffs while workers were losing their livelihoods, and that it was unacceptable. More than 9,500 people signed. Workers organized protests outside Dave Brandon's apartment building in Manhattan. They marched to the offices of KKR on West 57th Street. They showed up at Bain Capital in Boston. Under sustained public pressure, KKR and Bain each agreed to contribute $10 million to a hardship fund for former employees. $20 million total. Divide that by 33,000 workers, and you get roughly $600 per person. The 3 firms had collected $470 million. In 2020, a creditor trust filed suit against Brandon and executives connected to KKR, Bain, and Vornado, alleging breaches of fiduciary duty and fraudulent concealment. No criminal charges were ever filed. Today, KKR manages over $500 billion. Brandon sits on the board of Domino's Pizza. Nobody went to prison. Nobody was barred from doing this again. So who killed Toys R Us? Not Amazon, not Walmart, not some inevitable shift in consumer behavior. Toys R Us was killed by a $6.6 billion leveraged buyout that turned a profitable retailer into a debt-servicing operation. KKR, Bain Capital, and Vornado loaded it with $5.3 billion in debt, extracted $470 million in fees, and when it finally collapsed, 33,000 workers received nothing, while executives collected millions. The documents are public. The numbers are in the filings. And this is not a one-time event. Last year, Red Lobster closed 650 restaurants in a single week. 36,000 employees lost their jobs. The financial structure behind that collapse is almost identical to what you just heard. Same model, same type of owners, same outcome. It has happened to Sears, to Hertz, to Payless. The names change, the playbook doesn't. The The question isn't whether this happened. It's why it's still legal. One last thing. Charles Lazarus was the man who opened the first Toys R Us in 1948. He started with a baby furniture store in Washington, D.C. Parents kept asking for toys, so he started selling them. He built that single store into the largest toy retailer the world had ever seen. He died on March 22, 2018. The same week the last Toys R Us stores in America closed their doors. He was 94 years old. If there's a company you think deserves an investigation, a name that keeps getting away with it, put it in the comments. Sources for everything in this video are linked in the description.